Welcome to the Age of Listening channel. I'm doing a talk here on spiritual matters that I've gotten from my guide, and I usually say this is a cup of tea or coffee and a biscuit time, because there's a lot to cover and unpack. I was given this probably a couple of months ago, to be honest, and I put it off because it was so in depth. I just thought, how on earth am I going to do it? But I've finally plucked up the courage. Now, the conversation, as hopefully I've put in the title here, is the rock on which we stand. So I woke up to this title ringing in my ears. Investigate the rocks that people stand on. And with my guide, I'm given a sentence, then a big download. So this is me trying to give the download, and it's to the populace. So in other words, what are people's resting points of trust? So as I thought about that, and I was sort of having a conversation with my guide really about it, I began to write, and I've written notes, and I'm going to hopefully expand on this, on what I got from my guide. Now, I happen to believe that my guide is and my oversoul, my higher self, and yeah, that's just what I believe. So I got the Chariot card straight away. It really popped into my head, and the Chariot card for me is, which is a number 7. This is my teenagery card, and 7s are all about sort of being reflective, and it's the battle between the head and the heart, which is why for me all of the 7s are kind of like teenagers trying to work out what to do, and it's exploring and expanding not only their horizons but also their wishes and dreams within this kind of simulation that we're living in, because that's kind of how I feel it is, because my experience has shown me that that's what it is over the last kind of 50 years. So I looked into the symbolism, you know, in thought processes about the rock, and it reminds me of many stones that people have put their faith in. The stone of scone, or the stone of destiny, there should be pictures up now, or it's sometimes called the coronation stone. And this is known as an ancient sacred symbol for the monarchy of the Scottish people, that purportedly was moved to Westminster after being nicked from Scotland in 1296, which was purportedly returned to Scotland in 1996. I'm always reminded of the Hierophant card at this point, with its stone throne of authority, that some people believe that as well, that with the scone stone, or the stone of destiny, was actually part of a larger stone throne. And and I'm also kind of reminded as well of the Two of Swords, where she sits in authority on her stone seat. She has a blindfold on because she's not moved by her feelings. She's thinking in a manner of logic rather than emotion. And although that we do have the sea in the background, and we have the beautiful blue sky, the deep kind of, the sun's as set and the moon is coming up here, there is undercurrents of the subconscious going on, and there is you could say that there is a battle here, and you've got the female and the male, because swords for me are very masculine, where the moon is very feminine. But she sits in authority on the stone. In the same way also, the stone pops up in the Devil card, You know, there's a certain amount of authority there, but it's only the authority that you give him. Anyway, moving on. Yes, and here, look, you've got the stone of the King of Cups. Amongst the sea of emotion and the subconscious mind, he is very factual because he has mastered his emotions. And that's really what I'm saying here is indicative of what my guide said when he asked me to investigate what are the rocks on which we stand. So you've got the resting stone of biblical Jacob as well. That immediately came to my mind. And I think I'm going to put a link in to Toni Bandillo's article because it makes a lot of sense, because we often pay attention to the pillow rather than the dream. You know, societies love to distract us with the romanticism of earthly objects that surround spiritual matters more than the much more important spiritual matter that requires our individual concentration. And then I was immediately concerned or thought of the Rock of Jerusalem, the Dome of the Rock, which is a very historical site for all three Abrahamic religions. And there's a huge rabbit hole of deception, quandaries, and something for future reference, hint, hint, which is going to be on the world stage very soon. But anyway, so much talk surrounds the authenticity of these and many other stones and rocks. And my mind wandered through history, alerting me to where they have been used to misdirect and manipulate the masses. So I'm focusing on three categories today that most of us turn to, which is, and this was led to me by my guide. So I can't take any credit for any of this. Anyway, so religion is the first rock on which we stand. Self-belief and the self-belief movement is the second. And then the autonomy and universal laws, which basically is where we're beginning to wonder if the discovery of this self-experience in history is cyclical, because I do feel that religion, then self-belief movement, and then to autonomy and universal laws, and then it's back again to religion, self-belief movement, and to autonomy and universal laws. It seems to be cyclical. So we'll go and move on then to religion. Excuse the banging. We'll move these. No, we'll keep these out, because sometimes, you know, as I'm going to go through, because that was the introduction, as I go through, open your mind to just focusing on what your guide has to say. Differentiate between what you feel and what you feel your guide might be saying to you, or your oversoul, and use this as a time of meditation. Now, I forgot to light a candle. It's always pretty to have something in the corner, and I'll put my little joss stick on because I like everything to smell nice. And let's get going. Okay, so first then, there is a religious spirit within believers of the Abrahamic religions that talk of the rock being the faith of Peter, that would be an example to the church. Then we have the Dome of the Rock. Then we have the creation of the site of the Holy of Holies, the inner sanctuary within the tabernacle, which is within the Islamic Dome of the Rock. And as a former Christian, I understand followers' views on reverence for the sites such as these, The issue is, I just don't agree with doing it. Now, I agree with keeping these sites safe for historical inspection, but my guide has always inferred that holding them to their superstitious reverence, and it is kind of a waste of our energy and not worth my time. Now, why do I sound that just sounds so awful and arrogant? But it comes from what my guides always told me, which is, although I may be fascinated with historical artifacts, my guide has always sort of said to me, the power is within you. So if you lean on artifacts, places and traditional practices, and it helps you to focus on, joining your energy with your belief, then, go for it. But my guide has empowered me, with sort of, and sometimes it's been a bit harsh. I won't, I'll be honest. Sort of shows me a picture of a small child with a dummy. So whilst we're babies slowly walking towards spiritual maturity, and it's a passable excuse to have them at some point, my guide has always advised me not to lean on superstitious ideas. It stunts growth, is what I was always told. So as much as I've fancied a nice piece of jewellery in the past with a cross on it, or, an ankh or something like that, so that I could kind of romantically twiddle it in times of stress, or whatever, or wear it as a badge of club membership, my guide has always said, why? Why are you doing it? It's not my guide being harsh or my higher self being harsh, but rather I suspect it has more to do with my faith in my ability to live without a crutch. So I'll just say that again. It's not my guide being harsh, but rather he has more faith in my ability to live without the crutch than I do. And my guide is always wanting me to do better, move forward. Now, don't get me wrong, my guide doesn't stop me from getting into superstitious practices of reverence. Just lifting up my notes here. Yeah, but my guide does begin to roll his eyes if I get too much into a habit, because it's not the objects that bring strength of character, faith, maturity or wisdom, etc., but the practice of being without them. Let me say that again. It's not the objects that bring strength of character, faith, maturity or wisdom, but the practice of being a being without them. The practice of being a being without them. So Abrahamic religions work on the intellectual and behavioural bartering system, and if successful, they promise that we can navigate our way through life's pitfalls with a benevolent God who may or may not help or rescue the faithful. And my personal belief in that is that a lot of things have, people have seen incredible success. I too. But it's often like a stab in the dark, and you're lucky if you do, and you don't really know why, and it's hard to replicate. But it's often got to do with the fact of, if you have faith in something, step forward in faith and walk the walk. What I've always found is that life kind of reflects it back to you, and if you get that, then it's not really what you have faith in that's the issue. It's the fact of realizing that we're living in a sort of a simulated or a simulation or a matrix sort of environment where what we believe and step forward in is automatically created and brought to us in our environment that we can see and tangibly feel, which is great. And that's what we're supposed to do. But people are focusing on the artifacts than the spirituality that is actually involved. And you can even break apart the spirituality and see that, is it spirituality or just belief? So where are we? So little is said or taught on self-empowerment in the Abrahamic religions, even though as children of God it's written that the temple of God is within us. We are still taught to manifest outwardly or subserviency or show allegiance. But the idea that God's communication system is located within each of us, and thus all the wisdom, knowledge and understanding is at our disposal whenever we need it, is most definitely not taught with any direct success in these establishments. And I've seen it because they're either taught by people who are not very accomplished, but feel they should teach it anyway because they do understand it. It is in religious books, or they have no experience at all, and it is the blind leading the blind. Now, I can move that forward if I was going to be really heretical, and say that that works exactly the same in the spiritual community as well. But anyway, my personal belief is that there is no need for a middleman. A middleman in fancy dresses speaking on our behalf, healing on our behalf, learning scriptures on our behalf, thinking on our behalf. But I'm aware that there is a vast amount of the population that won't or can't take ownership of their own Jacob's ladder experience. So possibly there is a need for hierophants to spoon feed the masses. It's a quandary. And again, I see the inevitable fissures between those who are outside of the system and those who are in. It's a dichotomy, and I don't see the answer for it. But this is where, you see the breaking apart of the two worlds. But we're all on the same kind of. We're all in the same. We're all in the same program. So I know that people may say, well, I like my rosaries, I like my habits, they make me feel good, what's wrong with that? And I do have to say, you do whatever you want to do. If it makes you feel good, if it works for you, okay, great. But I just want you to understand that these are habits, and habits were put in place by religions to hypnotize the people into parting with their rights to spiritual, physical and mental autonomy, the right to self-govern. It was hypnotic. It distracted you. And it's been so long since we could self-govern that I suspect that most of us have lost the ability to not only truly self-govern ourselves, but also to imagine a world where we all self-govern in the first place. Abrahamic religions survive by gaslighting their followers with incongruent behaviour. Let me move my thing up. Excuse me. So yeah, Abrahamic religions survive by gaslighting their followers with incongruent behaviour, which produces cognitive dissonance in the masses, and it is a form of gaslighting. And this cognitive break arrests the followers into perpetual obedience. there's a bartering system of obedience to a parent god, and I've got, let's move this over here, to a parent god. And we as the children look up and to them for guidance. And I know this kind of situation has, you know, a lot of people say it saved them and it continues to save them. But I think we do need to be aware of this parent-child and relationship and where it's got us and where it's taking us. So we're going to move now to the next cyclical history, and this is the modern self movement and having that sense of self-belief. And we break here into a certain amount of fractions. So we have this, the self type 1, and then we have the self type 2A and 2B. So focus our attention to help you sort of get this, to understand this, because it took me a while. Okay. So let's do it this way. We started off in the second cycle. We have religion at the top. It then goes to the self-type 1, the self-type 2, and eventually leading to the self-type 2B. Crystal clear? Shall I write this? Number 1. Number 2. Leading to type 2B. And it's cyclical. Right. Let me find out. Yeah, so I once felt that I once felt this the way that a lot of people felt, and I was very devoted to the Trinity and the Church, and because I had proof that there was something outside of myself when I was in the Church that was acting on my behalf, and so I had faith. But I always had an issue with the practices of religion that produced fractured minds on the followers. Okay, so self-type 1. Firstly, the modern self, this modern self is kind of got its roots in narcissism, if I'm honest. And there's a lot of this, there's this kind of hippie movement, kind of no regrets, disengaging from the church. There's kind of always like a polarization happens, you know, and you kind of have to swing quite far in order to gain a bit of balance, but it always swings quite over to the type 1 initially, and it's kind of a desperate need for attention, you know, but also the wish to belong, and there is a desperate need to there's a desperate need to detach in society our need for control. But in doing that, you also swing over with the self-type 1 to being it's all about you. It's all about the me. It's all about the self. And so both, you know, parents now in this kind of movement away from the 1950s, 1960s, 70s, you saw both parents have moved into the workplace, We're moving into cities, or rather the towns are growing from towns to cities, and people are becoming detached away. So where you had in sort of pre-1950s, you had communities and clubs which generally filled the void of the church as people started to slowly slip away from the church. There was also the village life and communities which were also, you were also being separated from that kind of village feel and close commune with other people. And so loneliness and boredom and worthlessness started to creep in like an undercurrent. And this self, almost like a child without any leash, a child without any mentors to guide them, started to grow up as adults, needing that attention, but no mentors were around because they detached themselves from all mentors. This self-movement was ripe for the picking from unscrupulous societies, unscrupulous politicians, you could say. And I began to see in the 1990s how media and education were using the hippie movement to funnel certain agendas with the promise of entitlement and attention. First, this was sold to women, and thank you very much, because now we can own our own home and have it in our own name. And also other people groups as well, which was very positive in the beginning. And so people started to see this move away from the church and self-empowerment as very positive in the beginning. But like everything, there were smidgens of half-truths mixed in with much bigger lies. But people weren't able to see those bigger lies for about 50 years. Independent reasoning should have weeded out those that sought this as a power grab. But alas, too few of us saw it, and too few voiced it. I mean, they did, but not enough. And we are where we are today because of that misdirection on a grand scale. The aim to control the masses went from staunch religion, bridged by hippie love, to the glorification of the self and the self-preservation of it through fear, victimization, and also being the victim and producing division. It emotionally energized those that lived off drama and lived in the emotional realm, brought division in the community. But this movement never fills the void in the individual. It expands it. It offers no reprieve because it asks the others to change around the self, which is narcissistic in itself. So if we just move this for a second. We have the self here, and then the others that they view as anything other than themselves. Okay? So this is where it gets slightly complicated, so stay with me. Let me find myself again. Yeah, so it offers no reprieve because it asks the others to change around the self. And when others refuse to bend to the power of the self, then the feelings of victimhood and division expands in the self. Now, the self needs to mature despite its surroundings and limitations. because that is true enlightenment and growth. I'll read that to you again. The self needs to mature in spite of its surroundings and limitations. But that isn't what happens. What they say is, you have to change, the others have to change in order for me to mature and be who I need to be. The self-movement, for most, is a phase that one grows out of. We have children, we gain responsibilities, life gets busy, and usually we evolve. I could go into that. I'm going to leave that there for now. But no, I'm going to touch on it. So my wonderful son, my first son, and his partner, they don't have any children, and they react like a lot of people that have chosen not to have children. So when their younger brothers come and visit, they adore them and they love them and they think they're wonderful. But their whole life gets turned upside down when we go to visit, because they're used to doing everything on their own terms. And there's a certain amount of humility and self-sacrifice that comes with having children. And when you choose not to have children, you can become very insular in your own desires and your own needs, because you have the privilege of being able to do that, you know. But anyway, so the self-movement has then reached the goal of its original purpose, which is another way to control the masses. So instead of a handful of religious leaders over us, we now have an army of individual dictators, all crying, me, 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 because most others are good and understanding and caring individuals, and their first reaction is to placate and soothe and quiet this self and this childlike behaviour. And so they come as the parent, not the adult. They come to the self and view them as children. And they placate and soothe them and say, oh, it's okay. Whatever you want, we'll give it to you. Just, don't get all upset. Unfortunately, this other has enabled this child and childlike behaviour of the self to its peril, because the self, the child, has actually now become the parent over the others. And the others now have become, let's cross it over so they're in the right way, facing the right way. So now, because the others enabled this bad behaviour, they've set a precedent, and now they can now turn round to the others and tell them what to do, because the others now look at the selves and are now powerless unless they actually want to become adults and sort the situation out properly. But they're not going to do that, because the others, who are now put in a childlike state of obedience to the selves, are going to have to become an adult here and say, actually, I'm going to call you out on this behaviour. You're not behaving like an adult. You're behaving like a child. We all have hardships that we have to go through. And you're going to need to understand that in order to mature and grow, you have to realize that to become truly evolved, it is doing so in spite of your circumstances, because that's true character affirming. It's hard work, but that's what true character affirming is about. The fantasy, self-belief narrative that we have in society will fall away eventually, but not until the media stops pushing it, and or the others take back their adult roles. The individuals who follow this modern phenomena seem to thrive until they don't. Until the veil falls and they begin to come to the realization of what it means to be an adult. And this is where these selves are going to either have to go through a maturing phase quite quickly and not be into this enabled mode, or they're going to have very caring people around them who are going to be able to say, okay, the consequences of your behavior and your actions, we need to work through this together to help you to understand what it means to grow up intellectually, physically, emotionally, spiritually. So, because ironically in the days of religious subjugation, people at least had self-control. And it's a very useful trait that when we come to the phase 2 in society, that is kind of lost. But that is what needs to be recaptured again by the individual. So everything that the self-movement has hidden away from its reality will have to be rebalanced eventually in order for us to move to the next stages. Now, we have, as I said to you, we have 2 selves at the moment that are going on. The other is self-type, and I've called it self-type 2A. You're being very patient if you stayed with me. It is going to make sense, because this is slightly more healthy sense of self-belief, but it's got a lot of work to do. And I think a lot of us fall into the self-belief 2A. Type 2A have experienced repeated post-traumatic events. They have a lot of trauma from their childhood, but they attempt to shut down those feelings and just get on with life. And they're really in a juxtaposition here with type 1. Type 2 is relying on their own wisdom, physical strength, mental fortitude to make it through the day. But this often has an effect of not just weakening the body through, autoimmune diseases, which often happen through way too much cortisol, fight, flight, and freeze, being in that mode for too long. And the type 2A pushes forward in life. Usually doesn't allow others to help. They can feel quite isolated. They're very critical about themselves because the self-critique is their god of choice. So over here where we have self-aggrandizement, it's in complete conflict with 2A. which is basically the inner child running amok from post-trauma. And they have a lot of work to do with inner work to do with facing the demons, basically, of their past. Because leaning on oneself is a great survival strategy, but it wasn't ever meant to be a lifestyle, you know? Pushing forward is beneficial because it gets us out of or through a time of great stress, but it was never meant to be a place to inhabit throughout our entire lives. So if type 2A doesn't find a safe haven to stop this sprint to survive mentally, usually it's their body through autoimmune diseases or conditions, will quite quickly put a stop to it at some point. So when I see a client who has an autoimmune condition or disease, I ask them to ponder 3 questions. What kicked off their self-preservation mode? They generally do know if they're allowed, you know, if you give them time to think about it. 2, what is keeping the self-preservation mode going? And lastly, what would you need to do to switch it off? And which is a very personal question and is unique in every individual. As difficult as it may be for a lot to hear in most of these types, there is a lot of empaths with these 2, and with the others as well, actually, who believe they are empaths. But I personally believe that there are a lot of empaths that are not empaths at all. And I'd be very remiss to not cover this topic. There are people who are hyper alert to their own emotions in both camps, body and verbal language, dress, facial tells, that can be perceived to them as danger alerts. Or there may be subconscious similarities between that and a past trauma. But because they're naturally often simmering unprocessed emotions that are underneath the surface and they haven't really looked into what's going on, their alert system of fight, flight and freeze is usually on overdrive in both of these 2 categories. They make assumptions minute by minute, second by second sometimes. And because of that, they often misjudge situations and people. And you'll see them, they are often greatly moved by TikTok uploads, media hype, and you know, and they'll put it down to, you know, I'm feeling too much energy, the energy's too high, and it's rampant in the spiritual community. When in fact the explanation is far simpler. And I would encourage you to visit my full explanation, and I'll put a link in the to my website in the description as well. When is an empath not an empath? So suffice it to say, what they're experiencing is actually a loss of control. Control of their environment, control of people around them, and that mix signals and feelings that have not been processed properly. Which is perfectly normal, you know, if you consider that both of these self-types have been running away from their own personal metaphorical bear for probably 20 plus years. But it doesn't make them empaths. And this type, both of these types, have almost like a protective vest on. And they're the first to cut and flee from people, first to react to whatever they perceive as danger to them. And you'll know them because they'll often ghost people rather than face situations. They'll lash out rather than, you know, act like the adults act, which is they feel empowered enough to either not challenge a situation or challenge it, mattering to the situation. With type 2A, they often have a saviour complex. They pick up every waif and stray around. This is definitely one of those sure signs that they have a lot of inner child work that needs to be explored, you know. And I often see that with Harry Potter, who should have been picked up by social services a long time ago in his youth. But Harry is driven to rescue others in an attempt to resolve the loss of himself not being rescued from his own abusive family or step family. And it's a compulsion that type 2A selves have, and is demonstrating that there needs to be some evolvement and move from the rescuer. And with, you know, type 2A, there is often a glutton for punishment as well, and dare I say it, a victimhood that can often rear its head. But once you've awakened to the cycle that you're in, you start to fully appreciate that actually not helping people, but rather standing out of the way and letting them self-evolve is actually more self-empowering. And this moves us nicely, finally, to type 2B of the self. Good bit, guys. Type 2B has learnt the boundaries. Here you go. They've learnt to sit back and watch people before entering into close relations with families, friends and intimates. They know their worth and have a fairly good understanding of self-awareness. They've done their work on self-exploration, self-discovery and self-understanding. They are on the path of self-realization and, mattering to time, inclination and spiritual awareness, this soul will continue towards greater mastery of their spiritual, emotional and physical surroundings. And as I said before, you know, in fact, I don't know if did I glide past that. If you get type 1 and type 2A in a room together, there's often arguments because they kind of trigger each other, where the adult of 2B, the self 2B, will stay out of it if they have any wisdom. Type 2B have learnt about healthy boundaries and are happy in their own company. They have found their own peace and understanding of their limitations. They can stand by their convictions. They know not to rush in and speak, or they know when to speak and be reactive. But it's done in a way that helps them to stand up on their own rock, rather than just being a reaction to type 1, type 2A's emotional outburst. They are the judge of their own character, whilst open to learning more. And their ego is constantly being put into check. So to conclude, hallelujah, you may say. Finding stability within ourselves can often be a reactive solution, and it allows for no respite. If you have a responsible partner, and through practice giving jobs away, you know, letting go without judgment of results, you know, if you have a partner in your home life, you can practice not being so pedantic about how something's done, but actually being appreciative of what they do give in your life, rather than try to control them. If you have children, you are giving them age-appropriate jobs and being thankful and grateful for what they achieve, but not giving them a standard to which they constantly have to attain. It's practicing not being perfect within yourself or within your home. It's not wanting perfection from others. And I talk a lot about that in other videos in my Steps of Intuition, which is in my playlist. And instead of dampening down their feelings, they explore their feelings and explore their reactions to events and people. They ask why they're feeling a certain way. Does my reaction really come from others, or is it something old that's being triggered within me? And they harness these feelings and explore what's really going on. Does this need to control my environment and people come from me, or is it in reaction to my upbringing that I've not yet explored, an aspect of my upbringing? How does my behaviour around others make them feel? What can I do to bring peace into my life and others who share it with me? What brings me joy? What can I do to bring more appreciation into my life? And these are just, you know, one of 100 questions. Our consciousness creates our reality. Feeding the mind with positive aspirations about ourselves and others and what life could be if they were to appear. I've spent six or more years going to sleep dwelling on just beautiful scenarios, and it's amazing how quickly not only do I fall asleep, but I manifest greater things in my life. If you put a battery in your torch the wrong way, I do a little diagram here, let's see if I've got it right. If you put a battery in your torch the wrong way, it won't work. But turn them around and it'll work. And this is the same with our own personal outlook. The universe is not bothered whether you're a good person or not, when we talk about universal laws now. But it reacts to our intentions and reactions to situations, and it mirrors it right back at us. So here this is a mirror, and it's tempting to reconstruct with our own strength as self-type 2A likes to do, and definitely the self-type 1. And you can wish it better, or you can use virtuous intent and behaviour. But it's hard work, and the results are usually quite haphazard. Where if you set your intentions as type 2B does. Doing self-exploratory work, not trying to control others or control your situation, but instead look at the world as what would I like? What do I want to aspire to be? And picture that, but also step forward and picture that. You're coming from a place of appreciation with what you already are. The universe will shine that back to you in a physical way in your world. And I never like the word gratitude, but I do like the word appreciate. And when you're wanting a new job, for instance, I've always found that if you step out in action towards your dream job, then the universe has no other option but to reflect back to you stepping stones of how to achieve that. It's almost helping you. And so to circle back, the initial question of what do we put our faith in? And my question to it, which was, really what will catch us if we leap? The Fool card came to my mind. We have to step out as if there was something there to catch us. And if we step out in faith, then what will catch us will be our own faith. Will be our own. We will be manifesting as we go. If we have that positive view of this simulation that we're in, our faith will grow and grow in our ability. And I gave this story where a man that I used to know, everything he touched turned to gold. And that's because he believed that everything he touched turned to gold. And so it did naturally turn to gold. So lastly, my guide, who originally portrayed himself as Jesus to me as a child, I believe now wasn't Jesus, but it was a representation of somebody I would not be frightened of. And from that, his guidance, I always call it a hymn, has always instructed me to take charge of my own healing, investigate independently, and face the incongruence that I had when I was in the church, that I badly didn't want to see, but I had to see it. My guide wanted me to go within to be the person that he saw was within me. And after many years, I believe this is my oversoul, my higher self, which is in an alternative physical existence, and that I am an extension of him rather than he is an extension of me. This doesn't lead to universal laws manifestating just because I want it to be. I see the universal laws manifesting in my life because of past experience that have proved it to be the case. Well, that is where I'm going to leave it. There's a lot to unpack in there, and I hope you've got the will to do it. But really, if you can take just a few snippets of that, and hopefully your guide is able to look at it and show you and pinpoint to you even just a sentence that you needed to hear, then what I have said will have done its job. And I hope to heaven he never doesn't give me anything as blinking complicated as that again, because that was awful. That was so complicated. All right. Give me a thumbs up because it helps push this channel forward. I really appreciate that. And after this, I've actually got something else that my guide told me about. So onwards and upwards.